Well, hello there, my friends. This is your boy, Garrett J White, the founder of Wake Up Warrior and also the leader here inside of this insane movement we call the Wake Up Warrior movement. My brothers, welcome here to the Warrior Wealth Podcast. This is episode number 5 as we dive deep into a particular topic today, and that is the topic of protection. Now, if you haven't been with us through all the first episodes, I would encourage you to head back and check out the pilot episode where you'll get to hear more about who I am, why this show exists, and why I am here even having a conversation that may be relevant to you as a businessman. Now, regardless of what your experience has been with us, though, we're going to step into a short summary so that you don't have to go back and listen to the entire show, but give you a short summary about what this show stands for and what it's all about. A number of years back, my entire world imploded. That implosion happened through a process of really the dismemberment of my entire financial empire. As it occurred, my entire life was exposed for what it was, and that was a fucking lie. My marriage was a lie. My relationship with my family was a lie. The way that I operated as a man was a lie. Ultimately, I was not leading from power. I was leading from weakness, and part of that leading from weakness led me down a path of disconnection financially. Now, as a businessman, there were a lot of challenges I faced, and one of the challenges was trying to figure out how to put myself back into power. And that was the creation of the Warrior's Way to having it all, a unique art and science learned in a book called Warrior Book that you can find more about here at warriorbook.com. For a $100 investment, we'll send that book your way, and you can learn more about how we, myself and thousands of men around the world, 27 countries now, have been living this belief system as businessmen to put us in power in order to produce. Now, while the power conversation is something we cover inside of our podcast with Warrior on Fire, Date Your Wife, and Warrior Week, and several other podcasts we run here on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and all over the web, we are here focusing this particular show on one topic, and that topic is this, and it's getting the money, keeping the money, and growing the money. There's nothing that will more quickly and more drastically destroy a man's power than his inability to master and deal with the conversation and topic of money. And so I'm going to begin this conversation again today with you under a really powerful direction. The powerful direction that I speak about is the ability to understand the frame through which we're operating in each one of these shows. Week 1 of every single month, we're going to roll into the idea of power. Okay, we've already hit that show up for our first round. Second topic we're going to roll into is the topic of production, which is how do I take power and link it up to doing shit. Then we take production and we link that up to profit, which is how do I deal with the money conversation, linked up to the results that come from the productive conversation of the business. And then our final conversation in that 4-part experience is going to be protection. And that's where we're going to go today. Today, we're going to dive into the power of protection and why protecting is ultimately one of the greatest forms of production that a man can have inside of his business, his money, and his life. So let's back up here a little bit. So my family growing up, we had a lot of different belief systems given to us as children, just like you did and just like your experience may have been in the past with money as a businessman and or any man. Specifically, though, here in this show, we talk to the strengths and constraints and the struggles that businessmen face, and one of which is our story about money. And we talked about that on last episode, which was how your story about money ultimately drives and dictates how you operate with money. One of the keys inside of my world was the fact that my parents were hardcore savers. Now, there are books that have come out, Millionaire Next Door, several of the books over the years that have really encouraged individuals to try to save their way to wealth. That somehow I can save my way to power, that I can save my way to prosperity. Here are the facts and the way I see them, and if you disagree, well, fuck off, that's fine. You cannot save your way to prosperity. That prosperity and the ability to manage wealth across the board must be maintained through production. This means that I must create new shit. If you don't create new shit. You don't create empires off of simply just saving. Now, this is where the catch-22 comes into play, though. Because my parents were so intense in the saving category, I became the antithesis of my parents when it came to money, and that is I became a spender. This means that no matter how much money I got, I just found a way to blow it. And these habits, just like any addiction, started to rise inside of me. I would make some money as a paper boy, and then I would blow it immediately. I did some interesting things, one of which is Well, a characteristic I didn't really understand now nor then, but I had this habit once a week. After I got done with my paper out on Saturday mornings, I would head over to the grocery store on my bicycle. I would get a box of ice cream on my own with my own dash. I would take that box of ice cream. I would grab this green Tupperware that my mother had, a green, bowl. I would put the ice cream in the bowl, pour the milk in the bowl, mix the entire box of fucking ice cream up, and now comes the next piece. I would eat the entire bowl of ice cream on Saturday morning by myself watching cartoons. Now, my mom couldn't really say anything because I had earned my own money. My mom also didn't do anything to bail me out as I sat and shit myself to death over the rest of the afternoon because of diarrhea because of how much ice cream I had eaten. Now, this ice cream experience and the way I played out the bowl of ice cream was how I operated with my businesses for years. Little did I realize that my behaviors and patterns as a blow-it spender would actually come back to haunt me, and that there was a characteristic that blended between these two ideas of being a saver and being a spender, which is ultimately what we call a producer. That a producer understands the gift and ability to saving and also understands the gift and ability to spending. And that the dancing helix between these two characteristics of spending and saving ultimately becomes the biggest push to prosperity and production and the creation of wealth. So let's go back to the ice cream. So I'd find myself there Saturday morning. My mother would come in and she would look at me and she's like, what are you doing again? And there I was eating ice cream. Huge bowl of ice cream. No one else, by the way, I wouldn't fucking share with anybody. I was also very, very rude about this. My brothers and sisters got no ice cream. Mom and dad got no ice cream. I was like, assholes, listen here. I earned the money for this ice cream. This ice cream is mine. I will spend my money on the ice cream if I want to. I am the one that wakes up at 4:30 in the morning and does newspapers. 200 plus neighbors of mine that got the newspaper back then. Now we just download apps, but back then we delivered the newspaper. And so I got to choose what I wanted to choose. Now, this was the same story that I had when it came to building my businesses. I was like, I am the entrepreneur. I would do whatever the fuck I want. I am in charge of this show. So I would not take much counsel from accountants. I would not take much counsel from my tax attorneys. I would not take much. I just didn't take much counsel. I operated like an insane assassin that would go out into the marketplace, create a whole bunch of momentum through production, sell a whole bunch of shit, real estate deals, insurance deals, like whatever the game was, products, software, coaching, consulting, hair, salons, didn't matter. Like whatever it was, I had a predominant tendency to production in the game of hunting and creating new opportunities. Now, maybe that's you. Maybe you're a guy cut after my own cloth here. You're a guy who naturally, you're a pitch man. That's kind of your deal. You're looking at me and you're like, dude, that's me. I'm that guy. I'm the pitch man. And then there's some of you, you're not the pitch man. You're the guy that thinks things through. You're the CFO style. You're the entrepreneur that's much more complicated or much more contemplative about shit. You think through things a little bit more. You tend to have a little more pucker factor in your ass. You're a little more tight with the money. You think through financial decisions a little bit longer. And there's an upside to that side too. I just didn't ever have it. I thought it was bullshit. Why? Because I didn't want to be like my parents. Now, what I didn't understand about my parents was that my parents were not entrepreneurs. My parents did not have a lot of money. So, of course, my mom had to be a saver. Because why? Because there was no other option. There was no other option. There's a limited amount of money. There's 5 kids to feed. There's a family to provide for, and I never went for want. Yet my mom miraculously found a way through her disciplined saving, coupon cutting, to be able to create a game for us where we could ultimately be just fine as kids. But as a business owner, this same game starts to play out in the way I ran business. I had become addicted to spending, and I was getting the diarrhea side of ice cream because I had little to no concern for keeping what I made. Listen to me on that. There's the first phase of being a businessman, which is figuring out how to make money, right? And if you talk to somebody in that place about trying to keep money, you're like, hey, listen, are you going to keep any of that money? They don't get it. I didn't get it. You didn't get it. No businessman in the beginning gets it who's successful at any level. Because in the beginning stage of being an entrepreneur, the only thing you can fucking think about is what? I need to produce results. The only way I can produce results is to hit on the first 2 things we've already talked about, which is to hit on the idea of power, which is being able to put myself in check to be able to do the shit I know I need to do. And then the second piece is production, which is to ultimately refine my marketing systems, refine my sales systems, refine my fulfillment systems, and figure out how to systematize and automate and delegate the entire process around that, building a team with a brand and a culture that takes a stand. So this was all of the production side. So a lot of shit to deal with in there. Like a lot of shit to deal with. And people don't tend to spend much time on this. Most individuals don't spend time on this. They don't think, holy shit, I need to focus on the idea of saving. I need to focus on the idea of protecting. It's simply a game of how do I build and how do I build faster? How do I make this shit get bigger than what it currently is? And so off we go in this fiery place of producing. And pretty soon we come against the first big challenge in the game, which is we start to manage our businesses driven by the following reality. And we manage our businesses driven by the idea of what's in my bank account is the money that I actually have. Now, I came to find this was not actually true. In my first couple of years as an entrepreneur, I remember sitting there and I was looking at my bank account. I was making decisions about moves we were going to make. I was hiring some people. I was putting some money into the business. I was putting some money into our setup inside of our office. I decided that what we needed to be successful was we needed granite tables. Because everybody knows that as a successful entrepreneur, the only way that you can be successful as an entrepreneur and continue to build and maintain wealth is to do what? It's to have really fucking great tables. Second, you've got to have great suits. Great suits and great tables will overcome shitty marketing or none, shitty sales or none, shitty fulfillment or none, shitty systems, technology, and automation or none, shitty teams if you don't have any. If you just have a table and you've got great suits, you're good to go. So there I sat in Vegas, making a decision, buying more tables. And tables were unnecessary. I went to a store called R.C. Willey. We got these badass tables with these granite. They look just fucking incredible. Me and my brother. My brother was actually my partner at the time. It was the second business I'd run. My brother and I got these tables. We had a couple employees. We bought all this shit, and we're sitting there, and we're looking at all of the bottom line, and I'm making these decisions based upon just a lump sum of cash in the bank account. I'm not running my books clean, not tracking, no tax planning, nothing. There's nothing. I got nothing. Because why? I'm in the first 4 years of my learn how to even produce game. I am not in the game of trying to keep the money I've made. I'm not in the game of trying to grow the money I made. I'm in the game of just trying to make money. How do I ultimately make the money I know I need to make? That was all. That was my only request. That was my only question. How do I make more money? And so that became the central focus until, of course, we got to tax season. So I go into my account and I give them all my books, which basically were nothing. Basically nothing. Here was how my bookkeeping went down the first 10 years as an entrepreneur. We would spend money. Then I would take my bank statements to my accountants at the end of the year in a big fucking box. And I would say, figure it out. And they would go in and come back with some kind of concoction of here's your numbers. I'm like, oh my God. Literally, I didn't track shit. So here's the first thing I'm going to give you when it comes to protection. Okay, and then we're going to continue our story. One of the most powerful and the most fundamental ways to protect yourself inside of the game of building wealth is to know your numbers. Let me repeat myself. To know your numbers. Now, there are two kinds of numbers that you and I deal with. There were the numbers based on fiction, and there are the numbers based on fact. Now, I had a deep passion for the first group, which was the fiction numbers. I would look in my accounts, I would see what was there, I would make an assumption that everything was good, and then I would buy, really important assets for the business, like expensive as fuck tables made of granite from God knows where, with suits and shoes, because that's exactly what we need. The funnier part you'll get to know is that 95% of our business was over the phone, and nobody ever saw those fucking desks but me. But it made sense. Until, of course, I went into the account. So we're doing our taxes for that year. I think it's back in 2004, 2003, somewhere around there. 2003, I think, is the year we're doing this. We go in to do taxes, and I send the box, the books. The books are literally in a box. Like some people have their books in a book. My books were in a box because they weren't even, you couldn't even put them in a book. There was just so much fucking chaos. So I hand over my box, and I tell my accountants and my bookkeepers to produce for me the books. So they do. They go in, they produce it. I know. I'm sure I'm the only asshole who does this or who ever did this. Come on now, you fucking had years like this. Everybody does when they get started. There's no thought. It's like an afterthought. I'm going to work on the numbers afterwards. Right now, I've just got to figure out how I'm going to market, get some more leads, and sell some shit. Then you get to a point where you have the same experience I did. You go to your accountant's office, you sit down with him, he's taken the box, and he's turned it into books. And he looks at you, and you say, okay, give it to me. And then he gives you a number. A number. Now, I was running LLCs at the time, and again, remember, I'm not an attorney. I am not a registered financial advisor. That is not my game. I'm not a fucking heart surgeon, right? I'm not a brain doctor. These are not get-rich-quick schemes. I'm not giving you any fucking strategies. I'm just talking about my world. The reality is you're going to probably fuck everything up. Like, that's the guarantee, is that you will likely fuck everything up and nothing I share on this show will actually work for you ever. But for occasional crazy people who happen to get this, you might be like me, and so this stuff might work out for you. There you go, FCC. I just covered my ass. I'm not telling you to do shit. You're going to probably fuck it up, and it's guaranteed that you will likely fail. All right, so let's come back to this game then. So I had all these LLCs, right? Limited Liability Corporation. What ends up happening with an LLC is that the money actually passes through, right? So in my case, the money at the end of the year on the books, no matter how much cash in there, flows through onto your personal income statements after all write-offs that were acceptable and deemable by the IRS in dealing with that corporation, right? So what? Money goes through to my personal. He looks at me and he says, now at the time, this was a massive fucking number for me. He looks at me and he says, you have personal income tax of $137,000. Now, he might as well have said, I crept into your house and shot your fucking dog, cut him into pieces, shipped him off in Ziploc baggies to another country. Like it was that foreign to me. I'm sitting there and I was like, say it again, one more time. Excuse me. And he comes to me again, $137,000. I was like, are you out of your fucking mind? And he looks at me with this shocked look on his face. Now remember, I had not spent much time worrying about taxes. I had not spent much time worrying about tracking anything. I'd not worried about trying to keep my money safe. I was worried about two things. Market, sell, that was one. Fulfill, do the shit we said we were going to do. That's it. And so that was my beginning stage of, I had no other calculation. There was no other thought process. There was just make some money, and hopefully there was some left over that I could keep, and King's Cash, game on. But there was no sense of protection, no sense of saving, nothing going on with the money side. So I'm coming down this path, and I'm sitting with the accountant. He's giving me the number, and I face a harsh reality. I end up paying that amount in taxes, and that year shifted things slightly. But it would take another 4 to 5 years in entrepreneur, almost a decade into my 17-year journey, before I would actually wake up to the true power of knowing my numbers. Now, you say, how does knowing your numbers actually protect you? Knowing your numbers is the only fucking thing that actually matters in the beginning when it comes to scaling and building wealth. If you don't know your numbers, you are making predictions into the future driven on fiction. Now, what is the blessing of being able to build your empire driven by fiction? I will tell you, my friend. It is very simple. It is called a fantasy, is what you create. And that's what I created for myself. A fantasy fucking land. A land where I was fucking myself because I had no idea what my actual numbers were. I should not be sitting there on the day of the announcement. And that's what I would call it. I would, like, for years go into my accounts and I'd be like, it's time for the day. It's the day of the announcement. And people say, what do you mean day of announcement? It's the day of the announcement. Well, what is a day of announcement? Well, the day of announcement is the most anxiety-driven day of my entire year. It's the day I go in and I find out from my team exactly how much I owe in Texas. And what I find out after that is exactly how much money I don't fucking have. Now, if I go back to the first story I was telling you, I didn't have $137,000. I'd already spent the money on fucking stupid desks. Stupid desk and stupid shit and hiring people that didn't matter. I'd already spent all the money. The money was gone. I didn't even have it. I had to go sell some more, produce some more, and spend a couple of years digging myself out of this backwards, like robbing Peter to pay Paul tax game that I was playing. I finally got caught back up. Things got on point. Things got cleaner, but it came down to knowing this. Knowing my numbers actually matters. So strategy number one for this idea of protecting is knowing your numbers in your marketing. What is your cost per lead? What is your cost per client? Okay, what are your dollars per lead? What are your dollars per client? Knowing what your numbers actually are. If you're running advertising online, what are your costs per click? What is the cost per lead measured up on different campaigns? Like, what are your numbers and how much money does it cost for you to acquire a lead? Know these numbers and you accelerate a level of protection with your kingdom. Don't know your marketing numbers and you live in a game of hopium. Welcome back to the land of panda bears and happy fruit, Lucky Charms, and fucking flying Pegasus-style unicorns where your fictional-based fantasy comes true. And then you get the harsh slap back into reality. You get hit with tax bills. You get hit with personal liability bills. You get hit with all kinds of expenses and shit you were not counting on. You get workers' compensation lawsuits. Whatever happens, you get shit that happens as a businessman, but you didn't know your numbers, and so you got taken out. Sales conversion numbers. What is the converting number between the number of leads you get to the number of sales that you make? What is that percentage? What percentage of your teams are closing based upon the business? What is the numbers of actual clients in your client base that produce 80% of your revenue? Inarguably, around 20 to 25, 30% of your current clients pay for 80, 90% of the entire revenue for your whole fucking business. Like, you don't see shit like this until you know your numbers. And if you don't know your numbers, you are exposing your business and your future and your family to famine. Because famine is the outcome of building an empire on fantasy. You want to experience famine? You want to experience famine that's like a out of nowhere knock you the fuck out like I did in 2007 and 8? Well, guess what? You just go ahead and live from fiction. Because the reason why I did not see what was coming back in 2007 and 2008 was not just because I was fucking young and dumb. It was because I didn't have a finger on the pulse called my numbers, which means I, not knowing my numbers, was the single greatest risk factor to my businesses and to my wealth. I know you want to blame the president. I know you want to blame somebody else. You want to blame Hillary Clinton. You want to blame... Listen, you can sit around, jerk yourself off, and blame everybody. Or you can realize that at the end of the day, motherfucker, you don't even know your own numbers. Insurance won't save you. There's no insurance for being an idiot. Hey, I'm an idiot. I don't track my numbers. Can I get the I don't track my numbers insurance policy? They don't have an umbrella policy for idiots like that. I know, because I was one of them. And a vast majority, if I sat down, 95% of the entrepreneurs I've ever sat down with, 95% of the businessmen inside of Wake Up Warrior, inside of any organization I've ever been part of, that begins to change when they're here, could not actually show you clean, up-to-date books, even if you gave them 2 weeks to get on point. Couldn't do it. Couldn't do it. If you go to an entrepreneur and you ask them, what are the KPIs that are operating your fucking business right now? Do you have monthly and weekly flash reports coming into your game from your kingdoms? KPI reports for your marketing, KPI reports for your sales, KPI reports for your fulfillment systems. Do you have trackable metric-based scoring systems for your employees? Right? Like, yeah, this is shit I never, ever even considered. Why? Because I never grew up in the first decade as an entrepreneur beyond the get in power, produce, make some money, profit, never once considered protection. And so what my business cycles looked like was up and down, up and down, up and down, build and burn, build and burn, build and lose, build and lose, build and lose. Like, that was the game. And the only way that stopped was when I started to actually give a shit about protecting what I had built. And one of the ways we do that is we know our numbers. One of the ways we also do that inside of our protections, we protect our mindsets and our psychology as a man. Right, as a businessman, he's facing a lot of stress every day. Face a ton of stress. We've covered here on this show that you are your number one asset, that your business is your number one investment, and your number one strategy is to protect the king, to protect the queen and to protect the kingdom. Okay, we're going to talk about what that protection game looks like today. But we've started down this path of saying, listen, one of the ways we protect the kingdom is we know our fucking numbers. But we can't protect the kingdom if we haven't protected the king. And one of the best ways to wrap up that inside of a nutshell is a game and a system we call the Warrior's Way to Having It All. You can learn more about that by heading to warriorbook.com and join the over 10,000 different men who have invested in that particular book and are studying and living it in study groups all over the world right now. And this might just be the key you're looking for. Head to warriorbook.com and get your hands on that book today. All right, so let's come back here into our little circus we have going on. So we're in this game of protection. We're saying numbers, right? So as I started tracking my numbers, the thing that was crazy is there was a confidence that came in. It wasn't an arrogance. It was a confidence. Some would call it an arrogance, but it wasn't an arrogance. Arrogance is what happens when you live in fiction. When you live in fiction, you have to make shit up. You make up your numbers. You fucking make shit up. You're not living by the facts. You're living in fiction. And because you live in fiction, you live in fantasy. And inside of your fantasy, you're on your way to famine. And so you create all of this hype around your numbers because your numbers are not fucking real. They're bullshit. They're bullshit numbers. You know they're bullshit numbers. And you start to build an empire driven by this idea. How are you going to make investment decisions if you don't even know your numbers? What you end up doing is you gamble, because that's what men that don't know their numbers do. They gamble. They invest in shit outside of themselves. They invest in shit outside of their business, and they gamble. So I've got to be able to protect the king, number one, myself. Number two, I've got to be able to protect the queen. Now, that sounds interesting. One of the things I never recognized was the greatest addition to or subtraction from my success in maintaining and protecting my production game as a businessman was the relationship with my wife. Now, there are two situations I have gone through as a man. One situation is being on the same page with being on the same page with my wife, and inside of that, being on the same page with Danielle, having had great communication, great sex, great intimacy, great spiritual connection across the board. Like, we are going on date nights and shit is happening. Okay, this shit is working. We have an entire podcast on this. You can check it out here on iTunes called Date Your Wife. It's available on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, SoundCloud. You can check it out in any of those locations. We'd love for you to be part of that show with my wife and I. But one of the second places then that I had to protect was I had to protect the queen. And this meant that I needed to make moves that actually ensured that my relationship with my wife stayed on point. I'm not going to label that here in this show and talk about it a ton. You can learn every single week. Every single week we do a show on that. You can learn more about that at Date Your Wife and go check those shows out. So the second piece is to protect the queen. The third piece is to protect the kingdom. And I've already given you the first element inside of that, which is you can't protect the kingdom if you don't know your numbers. Okay, second piece in this is we have to raise the floor. We've got to raise the floor. So while I'm protecting the king and I'm protecting the queen and I'm protecting the kingdom, and again, here on this show, we're worried about protecting that bigger picture. How do I protect what I have built? The first thing we have to acknowledge in it, though, is that you actually do give a shit about keeping what you've built. Do you want to keep it? Seriously, sit back and think about this for a second. When you step back and you look at your business, like, do you see yourself in that business 5 years from now? Do you see yourself in the industry that you're in 10 years from now? Fuck, do you even see yourself in that game a year from now? Like, what level of fire and passion do you currently have around the businesses that you're in? What kind of level of fire and passion do you have around the position or the role that you're playing inside of those businesses? So part of this game is not just knowing your numbers, but it's also being able to maintain a vision that inspires you about that particular business. Think about this. You run out of vision for your company. You run out of vision for your position in that company, and shit starts to go sideways. Let me tell you a story. So I have a client of mine. He's in his mid-60s. Okay, he's been with me for about 3 years. And we're having this conversation one day, and he's divorced, and he's dating this woman. Eventually, him and this woman, actually, they were engaged. Or no, they never got engaged. They ended up breaking up and being done. So here he is, mid-60s. He's running a business. He's been running this business for 25 years, but lost vision for this company 4 or 5 years ago. stopped leading in his business 4 or 5 years ago, started just became complacent. That's how he found himself to Wake Up Warrior. How he ended up at Warrior Week and into our process, etc. Was a very successful businessman, had built some very big businesses, but was on the burnout phase of the game. Literally losing a sense of purpose, losing a sense of direction, losing a sense of connection with who he was. Okay, so here he is in this business. The industry that he's in is evolving. Technology is fucking changing the way that things are done. It's changing shipping, it's changing timelines, it's changing manufacturing, it's changing everything. He's in the food industry and it's changing. Half their game is fundamentally changing. Being outsourced out to overseas, to other countries, and his company was the kingpin before all the shifts started happening. But the biggest shift that started happening was that he stopped showing up every single week. He stopped showing up in board meetings. He stopped showing up in leadership meetings. And he would go a year without actually being actively involved in his own company. And people would be like, oh, that's fantastic. That's exactly what I want, which is wonderful. Until we get to a point where we realize that the only person who actually had pulled the business to the place that it was him because of his future visioning and his future pacing. What does this mean? This means that you have an ability to get your teams, to get your clients, and to get yourself to see all of you in a bigger future ahead of the current game that you're currently in right now. There's where you're at right now, and it might be working well. You might be having a fantastic fucking time doing what you do right now. It might be wonderful. You may be crushing it. I'm not taking that away from you. What I'm saying, though, is that human beings are constantly rebirthing themselves. They're rebirthing themselves. They're choosing to create themselves to become something new. This is natural reaction. Businessmen are no different. This is why they burn out. You want to destroy life? You burn out. You know what burned out businessmen do? Stupid shit. Stupid shit. Like, let me repeat myself. They do stupid shit. Like, the most dangerous businessman in the world to himself is not a guy who is just creating from a place of burnout. It's a guy who's creating from boredom. He's bored. He loses future vision. There's no future patient. And all of a sudden, that vision disappears and that businessman begins to contract down into a scared little ball. And I've watched this happen. I've sat with other men, clients of mine have come in and sat down, and these guys do 100, 200 million a year. But they've lost vision. And inside of losing their vision, they've lost a sense of who they are in the business. They begin to distance themselves from problems. They distance themselves from dealing with shit. They distance themselves from executives. I had another client, 62 years old. Same situation, massive contractor in the military space with the government. Massive fucking companies, homes in like 4 countries, doing all kinds of amazing shit. Took his eye off the fucking prize for 3 years. Lost vision and got lost in fucking pussy and crazy shit. Just got lost. That's how he found himself to Wake Up Warrior. And inside of that place, as he took his foot off the gas pedal as a leader, not only were executives in his company stealing millions from him, not only was he getting millions stolen, but he was getting left with massive tax responsibilities and a complete shit show. Because what? Because he decided to stop leading. Now, I'm not telling you that you can't, quote unquote, retire from some of the roles that you play in your business. But the one thing that you're never going to retire from, never, is Chief Visionary Officer. Like, you are the man that protects the game of your business, the economics of your employees, the economics of your clients, the economics of the future pace of your company. The profitability 4 years from today comes down to the vision today that you play with. So you want to put your company at risk? Don't know your numbers. You want to put your company at risk? Lose vision. You want to put your company at risk? Expect low-level executives inside of your company to build the company vision. Expect and delegate the most crucial piece of your fucking business, your numbers as well as the vision, to someone else. And hope that shit actually turns around. When the truth is, if you do not get a grip for yourself upon the truth of your numbers and build for yourself a clear vision for your future, you're fucked. And that was me. Like, I don't tell you stories because of like something I see in other people. The only reason anyone ever works with me is because they see, holy shit, this fucking guy has done what I did. He has screwed the fucking pooch just as bad, if not worse than me. And he's got some signposts here that can help me know where I'm at and when I'm stuck. And so one of the first things I do walking in working with other companies, I say this same situation with a businessman. I'm looking at him like, listen, what are your numbers? If our numbers are weak, they're unclear, they're foggy, I'm like, you are literally committing to destroy this company. And then project number overhaul, which took me, once I got this, it took 3 years and it took 4 full-time people to get my numbers created clean as far as we could go, 10 years, and to go all the way up into the present and then to future pace our planning through taxes, accounting, and economics to move that forward so that I knew my numbers, and every Friday I can pull up on my cell phone. I can pull up KPI reports across the entire empire, across all my companies, across all of my businesses. I can know exactly what's going on with marketing, sales, systems. I can know what's going on with my people based upon scoring and ranking of their personal productivity and their personal power. I can know what the fuck is going on at any given time. But that took a while. And so you may be in a situation when you're identifying and listening to this, you're like, listen, my numbers are shit. I don't even know my numbers. I'm unclear about my numbers. I'm the guy that's buying the desks with the pile of lump sum of cash sitting in the account. Or maybe you're the second guy who's not protecting your business and you're not protecting your future and you're not protecting your wealth because you've lost vision. And your lack of inspiration around the future is literally suffocating the people on your team. Your sales teams, your marketing teams, your systems builders, your software teams, your technical teams, your people that are running in the back office, your assistants. Everyone is driven off of this vision of the mission that you say you stand for. But if you don't have a vision, if you cannot clearly speak it, no different than if you can clearly speak your numbers, then what you're left with is fantasy. And fantasy feels nice. It feels nice because inside of fantasy, you can create all kinds of fucking fiction that you want. Your fantasy is the place you think you are. Your fiction are the fucking lies you tell yourself about where you are. Oh, yeah, we're totally on point. And then you start to tell the truth. And you start to see yourself. You start to say, what the fuck? I'm like off. Dude, we are off. Like, I don't even know my numbers. And listen, there's going to be some here on this. There's smaller business owners and you're just getting started in the game. I'm telling you right now, the principles do not change. Tracking your numbers doesn't change when you're small any different than when it's big. It's just more people involved and there's more commas and there's more numbers. That's all. It's the same fucking game though. It's a mindset. I protect the empire. I protect the kingdom by what? By knowing my numbers. Number 2, I protect the kingdom by having a vision. A vision for the future. And without a bigger vision, I will perish. Without a bigger vision communicated to my teams, I will perish. Without a bigger vision communicated to my teams, they will perish. They can only be as inspired as I am laying down the tracks for them to be inspired. Third principle for today. We're continuing down this path of protection. I'm going to have a little drink here. Side note, if you're not watching this show, and you could actually see me taking a drink right now. Little water. This show brought to you by Arrowhead Water. Not really. It just happened to be the water that was in the fridge here in the podcast studio. So, protection. Let's continue. So I was unconscious about how unprotected my businesses were. How unprotected my life was. And then I started to see clearly that I had evolved past this point of just making money. Like I had to learn how to keep money. Like I had to learn how to keep it. If I didn't learn how to keep it, I was fucked. And so I had the first problem, which is I didn't know my numbers. I had the second problem, which is I kept running out of vision and running out of runway. And then I would burn out, get bored, and burn shit to the ground. The third piece in this, though, is that I was addicted to spending the money. Like it just was. You know, we talked about this last time, like last episode, about this idea of this money mindset and how my mindset was such that I was constantly getting rid of the money. And so the third piece inside of this game of protection is actually being excited about saving. It's actually being excited about building what I call the king, the queen, and the kingdom vaults. Now think about this idea of a vault. What is a vault? When you think about this in your mind, and I say that usually at the core of your business world, more important than just about anything else you've done, number one asset is you. Number one investment is you in your business. Number one strategy to maximize the growth phase of money is to stabilize the vault and the moats around your castle. So envision this. You have a castle. Your castle is sitting inside. Inside the heart of the castle is like the Ark of the Covenant vault. There is this massive fucking vault that sits at the core of this castle. Inside of this vault, you will find two things. One thing inside of this vault you will find are your human life value assets. Your human life value assets are the things that people cannot take from you. As a king, to get to the place that you are in your businesses, as a businessman, to build to where you are, there are certain ways of thinking, aka your mindsets, ways of doing, aka your skill sets and strategy. There are ways for being strategic in the creation and the expansion of your kingdom that are valuable to all who are in the kingdom, aka your employees, your children, your parents, your wife, you as a king. So one of the things we have in there are these human life value assets, okay, which always come down to this things, this intangible that you can't take from me. My marketing skills, my speaking skills, my mindsets around productivity and around creativity, my mindsets around physicality and my athleticism. Like there's things around this. You cannot take my mindsets and you cannot take my skill sets away. You could try to take everything else, but those two things are going to be with me regardless of what fucking goes down. So we have this situation of my mindsets in play. And my mindsets are one of those things stored deep inside the heart of this vault. And I want you to paint this story. You walk into this open ground and there is the castle. Bring out whatever image of castle up works for you in your mind. You walk through the front doors of this castle. There's some guards that are sitting on the outside. There's some guards around the outside of that castle. And I want you to notice that around the castle are these huge walls. And in order to get through into the castle, you've got to go around these walls. We're going to talk about these walls in a future show and how building the walls and the moat around and why they build moats with castles to keep people out, why all of that exists. But for today, we're going to just talk about what's inside this castle. So at the core inside of this castle, at the very, very bottom, in the basement cellar, deep underneath the ground, are these vaults. Very similar to the catechisms, which were like these places where they would go down deep in. They would store sacred writings, and they would also like put dead people, right? Burial spaces inside of pyramids, deep down inside of these pyramids. But here you are in this castle, and you go down into the very, very bottom of the castle, and there are these massive lockdown vaults. And it's a modern castle. So it's like on the outside, it's like old school castle, but on the inside, it's like a modern place. And so imagine the most intense and the most profound lock and safe system that you can imagine. You've got this huge safe, aka vault. You go down to the vault, you open it up, you put the code in, you open up this vault and you pull it forward. You're a king at night doing this, maybe modern ways. You got the cell phone app, lights, the flashlight app going on your cell phone. And you open up the vault and you walk in. On the left side are all of these servers and databases. All these servers are lined up on the left side. And what that is, that's all of your data. The data that matters, your mindsets and your skill sets, your human life value that you can pass on to your children, your human life value that you can give to your children, the human life value that you study. It is the documentation of the processes and systems of production and power. That's on the left side. Now turn and look to the right side. And on the right side, I want you to see a massive, massive, massive fucking amount of cash. Cash. Now, it's interesting when you start to look at this. We're going to back away from this for a second. There are a lot of very successful companies, and companies determine whether or not they're successful by a lot of different reasons. Some look at popularity. They're like, well, we're super popular, and so we're successful. And some people measure popularity more than they measure profitability. You can see this in individuals who do ridiculous shit with their marketing. Like, why are you fucking doing this? And they're doing it because it makes them popular. They're not actually tracking shit, and they don't really have a big vision outside of just being popular. So they're sitting in this place, and they're moving, and they're moving, and they're creating, but they never actually know if they're producing anything that would be of sustainable value for them. There's other companies that measure this based upon the amount of gross revenue. And we've talked about this problem, this challenge of just having a top-line revenue mindset and how top-line revenue does not just guarantee fucking success. And so we have this top-line revenue conversation that some businesses like jerk themselves off to. And then we get those that are net profit guys. We're like, net profit is all that matters. What is the baseline on this? How much money are we profitable as a company? Da-da-da-da-da-da-da. And then you get guys who look at it like me, which is like, I'm glad that those are profitable, but the one number that actually matters to me is King's cash, which is how much money did I as the king take from the businesses this year? Now, amidst all of that, though, there are individuals who take a step further. Individuals in business who understand the power of cash. Literally the ability to have a simple fuck you strategy on their hands. Cash that backs up the kingdom. Cash that makes it impossible to be stopped. Cash that funds the expansion of the kingdom. Cash that sits and stockpiles itself. Now, when I started down my investor path, and I began to read Rich Dad Poor Dad here like shit. Now we're like almost 17 years ago. I read this book and it begins to change my life. And I head down this path of what I think is an investor. And inside of this path, I become very confused. I don't realize that I'm my number one asset. I don't realize that my business is my number one investment. And I definitely don't ever recognize that the number one strategy inside the game would ever be to store up my human life value and my cash value sitting inside of a vault. That I needed both. The capital of my humanity and the capital of my cash sitting at the core of my vault. Saving money? Are you out of your fucking mind? Why in the fuck would I ever do this? This did not make sense to me. I made no sense. I had come from nothing, so it was like produce, and hope we have some left. Well, as I began to do things differently, and as I began to study more, and as I began to look at my follies and the problems of my follies and the mistakes that we had made in business and all the money I'd lost and all the mistakes and the 100 plus people that I had to fire and let go of from companies because of my inability to manage the fucking businesses, I started to look at things a little bit different. I'd never found saving to be sexy. I was like, why the fuck would I save money? It didn't make sense. I saved enough money to make sure that we were okay, but I didn't ever consider that saving could be a strategy. I never once considered that cash at the core of the castle gave me courage at levels to expand the kingdom walls in ways that I had never imagined possible. So I have built businesses with zero going on behind me. What I mean by this is I'm literally borrowing on credit cards. I'm on borrowed money. And there is a desperation factor that comes to creating. I've also built and made business moves nowadays with massive fucking vaults filled with cash that are not for doing anything else than simply the backup plan and the policy that allows me to what? Get permission to produce at an even bigger fucking level. Now, in my 20s, you wouldn't have got me on this. So if you're a 20-year-old, you're like, fuck you. If you're in your 30s, you're probably still like, fuck you. If you're a single guy, you're probably still like, fuck you. If you are a married man with children and you are a businessman, what I'm talking about is a principle inside of your world called raise the floor. Now, my wife is a wonderful woman. Was and is a wonderful woman. One of the wonderful things that she tolerated with me, which is probably the same thing that your wife tolerates with you, is she tolerated the fact that you were up and down and all over town when it comes to business. Big money, not as much money. Making money, not making money. Like the life of being married to an entrepreneur and a businessman is a hairy one in the first 10 years. Some men never get over this place. And so their wife learns to just be in a place of complete insecurity over the fact that things are going to be big and then they're going to fucking suck for a while. And then they're going to be big and they're going to suck for a while. And this was a demonstration of my inconsistency in investing in me as the number one asset because I would never put time and energy into myself to stabilize me. Then I was investing minimal amount in the business because I continued to waste all this fucking money in investments that I thought were going to give me the magical ATM solution. We talked about that last show. And then I got to the following reality. My wife needed to be able to see that as I was taking risks and the business that I was building, that as I was building it, our family life was secure. I had never given her this. I had never once considered that it was necessary. I was a guy that was willing to take it down to the red line. I had come from nothing, and so my standard for the floor was very low. You know, I heard a story told one time about Oprah Winfrey, and she was sharing this at an event that my friend was at. And she said she has a poor girls fund, and her poor girls fund was $300 million. I know the number itself is a massive one for many of you, a massive one for me. I don't got $300 million sitting in a poor boys fund. But inside of that fund, it was literally the go to hell money. It was like the fuck off, I'm going to do what I want money. It was like the if everything goes fucking wrong, I have got a backup plan and the kingdom will continue to find order. So for the first 12 to 13 years of my entrepreneurial life, 12 years, I did not operate with a vault at the core of my castle. My floor was zero. I did not have a high standard for the floor. I had expanding reach to the ceiling, but my willingness to fall all the way to zero was incredibly high. That tolerance and that pace that it put me, I was willing to literally implode the fucking game. And then I woke up to a different game. And that game was that there was nothing protective about what I was building by not raising the floor. That my goal and my outcome every time I built something new was to raise the floor in proportion to the ceiling. So that I never was falling more than 10 feet. Never. I used to find huge kudos as an entrepreneur, knowing that I was literally free climbing, 75 feet off the ground with no ropes, no support. And if I fell, I died. Like there was some kind of pound my chest and feel amazing about myself when I could pull this shit off. It was almost like a badge of honor to tell everyone I was climbing with no ropes. And I'd gotten very good at it. And I could climb with no ropes. And then there were the moments that I fell. There were the moments that shit went south, and the moments I had to come back and face a harsh reality that I was a slothful steward as a businessman, that I did not take care of my business. I did not take care of my people because at the core of the castle, the vault was barren. Not only were my human life value assets not actually listed out, at the end of the day, there was not a sufficient amount of cash. Not a sufficient enough amount of quantity of dollars at the core of my kingdom that were my fuck you money. Fuck you money that set up my family and fuck you money that set up my businesses. That there was actually established inside the core of my castle that the number one strategy that a businessman can create to maximize double, triple, quadruple production inside of his number one investment is to actually build and sustain larger and larger vaults at the core of his castle. That this is a percentage of the revenue that you do that is literally set aside in a protected vault that cannot be taken, that cannot be looted, that cannot be mooched, that cannot be stolen, and itself is also not used as a resource except for when the kingdom is burning. And if you play the game correctly, the kingdom is almost never burning. The vault is about giving a shit about raising your standard. It's about being okay with having cash. Apple right now, the most cash profitable company in the world. Over $140 billion in cash. Cash. I did not understand the magnitude of this until I started looking at the moves that Apple's able to make. Apple is able to make moves that most competitors cannot fucking make, because at the end of the day, they can literally outspend everyone. And they know that the business does not ride or die on these home run hitting strategies, because they're not home run hitting strategies. They're moves that are being made backed by $140 billion in cash. That is not credit lines. That is $140 billion sitting at the core of the castle in the vault. Some call this a reserve. Some call this a slush account. I call this a vault. And over the next couple months, as we do this show, on the fourth show, every time I hit protection, I'm going to talk a little bit more about this vault. And I'm going to talk about why knowing your numbers actually allows the vault to be built. Why knowing your numbers and having a bigger vision actually allows you to build the vault. And why protecting your psychology and protecting the sanctity and sanity of the queen and protecting the business by raising the floor. There is no pride in free climbing 75 feet off the ground. Raise the fucking floor so that you're 75 feet up and the floor is 65 feet up, also leaving a 10-foot gap, which means if you fall, you don't die. You fall, you live again tomorrow. You simply have a scratch and a bruise and you build again. See, being a businessman in today's marketplace is not about building something quick so you can fucking sell it and retire. You want to be a businessman that's on fire. You want to build wealth. You're going to have to be okay with having cash. You're going to have to be okay with not just credit lines. You're going to have to be okay with more than just money moving in and out of accounts. You're going to have to be okay with being more than just gross revenue and net revenue and King's cash. You're going to have to be okay with setting up plans to actually keep the money that you make. And I was the greatest enemy and proponent against this because it was, quote, unproductive. But that was a 20-something entrepreneur. That was a 30-something entrepreneur. That was a man who was operating from the place he understood. That was a man who had not put his family in jeopardy. That was a man who had not taken his family to the edge over and over and over again. The cost for playing this way was costing me my marriage. It was costing me my vision. It was costing me my sanctity. It was costing me my sense of self. It was costing me everything. Protection is not just a nice idea. It's not a fucking insurance policy that you go buy to make yourself feel better. Protection is one of the most lethal production strategies that exists. Because in the end, why build something if you're just going to let it burn? I'll tell you why. Because you lost vision and you lost purpose. And so inside of that frame, it makes sense to just let shit burn. But inside the frame that I'm speaking to you about, inside the idea that I am speaking to you here, there's actual huge power in cash. Huge power in a vault that stores that cash. Huge power in your number one asset, your number one investment, and your number one strategy. What is your number one strategy? It's really simple. Protect what you've built. My brother, I hope that this episode has given you a little more down that. We're going to continue to dive down the path of the vault every episode that we discuss the game of production. We'll be back here next week for another episode here of Warrior Wealth. We'd love your help and us appreciating a portion. I'm here with the show by going ahead and subscribing and leaving us a review in iTunes or Google Play, Stitcher, or SoundCloud. You can always head on over to warriorwealthnow.com to pick up all the show notes, tips, tricks, and action guides available for this show and every show that we do. Thank you so much for being here this week. Next week, we're going to be back with episode number 6 as we dive into the topic of power. In this, again, moving the focus back to the number one asset. We'll follow that up with production the week after. We'll follow that up with profit, and then we'll be right back here to the vault conversation, and I will take the vault even further. My friends, thanks so much for being here. This is Garrett J White, your host here in the Warrior Wealth Podcast, saying good morning, good afternoon, and good night.